Yep, great. Thanks, Nancy, and thanks for having me today and for getting such a fantastic event organized. I'm Alex Karnell, and I'm currently a partner managing director at Deerfield, where we're launching our cure at 345 Park Avenue South. You know, it's an interesting origin behind the project and our sort of arrival to the space. And if you'll indulge me with a minute of context, it'll all kind of come together and make sense. But you know, Deerfield is a wonderfully remarkable place where we have about 150 people that come together every day to do work that matters. And we love the work that we do because we get to spend our time figuring out investments across the entire healthcare space. It's probably one of the most exciting times to be in our space because of just how many transformations are stacking to give us the potential to have, you know, just an unprecedented number of new medicines with unbelievable efficacy behind them. And the environment that we're entering is such that there's a lot of opportunity. And so as we think about where we are today on the investment side of our business and the way in which we're partnering with leading academic institutions with over 15 partnerships with some of the best and brightest, bringing technology, you know, forward from the bench and needing capital to bring it forward to the bedside. The number of companies that we're forming, you know, almost on a every month basis, and you know, our own personal need for these companies to get a great home that's advantaged in every way possible. We decided to stand up and do something about, you know, that need and help to partner with the city of New York to push New York to a place where it could someday be one of the leaders in our country, you know, in such an exciting space. And so we partnered with the city and we were able to acquire, and we're just about finishing up the repositioning of 345 Park Avenue South. And then our vision for this building is that, you know, for one of the first times in New York City, we're going to have, you know, brilliant scientists, innovators, researchers, you know, standing there sort of shoulder to shoulder with the folks that are controlling the capital and using that capital to help move these great ideas forward, and sort of a unique partnership in a unique environment. And we hope that that's the foundation of what could be, you know, much bigger and much more impactful as time comes.
Yeah, great. So why the cure? Is that the name of the development?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, you know, we just went right at it. You know, the goal is cures. You know, the goal for any one of these exercises to go and, you know, commit your life and your capital to trying to change people's lives is, you know, you set out with the goal of curing disease. Now we often will fall short, but many times, even as we fall short from the ultimate goal of curing diseases, we'll start making steps in the right direction along the way. And it's always these steps that then stack that ultimately will someday lead to the cure. And so we figured, let's start with what we're all aligning and trying to accomplish, and then we'll just keep fighting every day to get there.
Yeah, so great. Could you just talk a little bit about the research initiatives that you founded around the country and in New York City and how those will relate to the cure?
Absolutely, they're critical. So, you know, what we've done is in every aspect of how we've developed our business, you know, along the way, we've often thought about what could we do in a way that others can't, at maybe a scale that others can't, that will help us to carry through on our goal of advancing healthcare. And so in our earliest days, all we did was invest in public companies. And while that's an important part of the continuing of making sure that there's the capital and the capital markets to move these ideas forward, our big vision and aspiration was to someday be able to go where others couldn't and where there was a real need. And that need happens to exist at our academic institutions across the country, and where you have the sort of, you know, the general setup is brilliant scientists spending their lives in labs for 10 to 20 or 30 years, all of that time fighting for this one great moment of discovery. But the problem is, like with many great, you know, moments in life, when you get to that moment, the question is, okay, well, then what? And, you know, all too often the then what means, all right, we have to go and take this breakthrough, the scientific discovery of the biological basis of some complex disease. They have to take that learning, and then they have to go to their tech transfer office, which is then responsible for, you know, hundreds of folks with ideas and technology that needs to make it out into the investable universe. And so recognizing that there was a real bottleneck, and there's a real bottleneck for these ideas getting to us in the investment community and and the time course by which these ideas can first get to us and then become a company, you know, we decided that we could actually do something to completely transform the way in that relationship takes place. And we thought it was exactly the right time to be doing it, because what we're seeing is, major step function change in that probability of those ideas coming from the bench actually making it to medicines. And so not only do we have a problem today, we have a problem that if we don't do anything about it, will get worse over time.
Mhm.
And so we went out and we committed very substantial amounts of money to some of the greatest academic institutions in this country. And we've basically entered into master sort of partnership and development agreements. And so every quarter, we get hundreds of ideas that are submitted to the Deerfield team, all of which go through a systematic process for identifying what's the unique insight, what's the next key experiment that needs to be done to determine whether or not this insight is validated or not, and then what is the capital that's needed to bring this idea from idea to patients. And we're systematically going through hundreds of these on a quarterly basis. And when we find an idea that matches our metrics for moving forward, we can go from idea to company formation to capital inside of 2 weeks. And then the company is off and running and to the races. And we've got a remarkable team standing there, side by side with these great scientists to help them have every advantage possible. And one of which is access to great space in New York City.
And so the goal is to bring these companies to locate at the cure. That's
correct.
Can you describe the different elements that are that you've programmed into your building?
Yeah, it starts with the basics, and so we need to have incredible space, and we've got great floor plates to be able to do that. We have essentially spared no expense in terms of trying to get the infrastructure in place to have 8 full floors of wet lab enabled space, and we've got a lot of demand for that right now. As we look at what's going to be resident outside of the actual space that while we'll do a base build out, it can be customizable by each of the tenants to their own specific needs, and they are specific. We're then going to bolster it, and some of the key elements for us in terms of creating a center for incubation and growth is it's not just the space, but then it's also access to capital of a lot of different forms, both financial capital, which we have from the Deerfield team and our funds and our ability to make investments behind these companies. But what we also have is a lot of human capital. And so, what people don't realize is when these companies are in their early stages, there's just a wide range of strategic questions, insights, and expertise that are needed. And oftentimes you have just a few people that are leading these companies and a small board, and they're resource constrained. And so part of the goal in creating the cure is to also arm these companies with access to our entire resource set. And so we've got a group at Deerfield called the Deerfield Institute, which numbers about 70 and has expertise across everything from epidemiology, biostatistics, clinical trial design, all the way through data science and data engineering. And so we're setting up systematic programs whereby these companies can connect with our team so they can get that strategic insight, they can get that novel perspective that will help increase their probability of getting to patients and help deliver on our vision to truly advance healthcare. The other thing that I think is really important is the programming to connect everybody in the building. And here, we've made some incremental investments to really activate the roof deck of the cure. It's going to be absolutely incredible. We plan to host symposiums and all types of wonderful events, bringing together world-leading scientists, researchers, investment folks, and try to build the community fulcrum point so that folks have a place to come on a regular basis to connect, interact, and the serendipity of 2 people meeting and that leading to something that can transform other people's lives is what we're trying to set up for regularly.
Well, it sounds very exciting. I'm going to look forward to having cocktails on that roof deck one of these days.
So are all of us, and we would love to have you, Nancy.
Great. So Rob Albro, King Street Properties, can you introduce yourself and your project?
Sure. So I'm the unlucky one to follow Alex after his very eloquent description of what they're doing. But so King Street Properties, we're a Boston-based company. We're a life science owner, operator, developer. It's all we do here in Boston. We have about 3 million feet in total, with another 1 million feet under development, predominantly up here in the greater Boston area. We do 3 things, I'm going to say, predominantly. We do spec development. We'll go into a little bit on our project in New York and why that's important, but we do a lot of spec development and have always done that up here in Boston. We've done a lot of renovating, converting existing buildings, whether it's an office building, brick and beam, industrial, all types and flavors. And then the third thing that we've done quite a bit of is converting corporate lab buildings. On this slide here, the upper left building was actually developed by Pfizer And we converted it to a multi-tenant building, put in significant capital, and now is a very successful building, pretty well known in West Cambridge. As I said, we're predominantly focused up here in Boston. We have our project in New York, which we'll go into a little bit more detail on. And then we also recently purchased a 500,000 foot campus down in the Raleigh-Durham market. So we've been doing this for a long time. We've been at it since 2002. The other thing that we're now very focused on is biomanufacturing. We might hear a little bit about it today, but we think that's an area of growth, especially up here in Boston. And we're making a big push and have done a lot of it, but are making even bigger push on that up here. I don't know who's advancing the slides, but if we go to the next slide, a little bit about our project. Our project is called Innolabs. It's in Long Island City, right in the heart of Court Square. It's a 6-story building, about 270,000 feet. Floor plates are about 40,000 feet each on average. This is one of the first spec lab buildings in New York. Obviously, there's some, those of us that are doing buildings are largely on this panel, but we've been working on this for a couple of years now and are well into the construction. We'll be delivering in the first or second quarter of next year. What we've aimed to do with our project is build what we're calling a Cambridge style lab building down in New York. We're building maximum flexibility into the building, the ability to multi-tenant it and allow tenants, to grow and can really take all shapes and sizes, whether it's a biology focus, chemistry focus, everything in between. And we've built that flexibility into the building. If we go to the next slide, it's a little bit more about the building itself. Again, 270,000 feet. What we've done here, and I'll go into Long Island City a little bit in a couple minutes, but what we tried to do is build maximum flexibility in terms of loading docks and freight elevators. What we wanted to do is take a building and basically start from scratch. We wanted an existing structure for speed to market. I think, Alex talked about, all the positive things, and others will talk about all the positive, and I know we've talked about already, but the positive momentum we have in New York, one of the missing elements was space for these tenants. So you have all these incubators growing, you have tenants growing in New York, but there's not that space for them to grow into. And we've done that a lot in Boston. We've grown with tenants from 4,000 feet up through there. We just took a tenant through and built their biomanufacturing facility as well. So we've seen this before. So we're building a building that can accommodate all shapes and sizes of tenants. And we've built the mechanical systems. We've built a centralized acid neutralization system and put all the infrastructure in that the tenants need and expect. Additionally, from the base building, we've built what I'll say is an oversized lobby communal area on the first floor, which we think is very critical. It's something we see a lot here in Boston. It's something that in talking to our tenants find very attractive. A multi-purpose room that can be used for community events, we can use for speaker series, hosting, local college speakers, whatever it may be, but also can be subdivided so tenants can use it for an all hands meeting or further broken down to smaller group meetings. And it's something that we think is important. And, we aim to grow Long Island City in general. We'll talk a little bit about the location and why we picked Long Island City. But we're hoping that, our building is kind of planting the flag for Long Island City. There's obviously some other projects that people are aware of in the area, and we're starting to see this cluster develop here in Long Island City. So if we go to the next slide, a lot of people ask, why did a Boston developer come to New York, and then why did you pick Long Island City? For the first, I'm going to say 6 months a year, we would say Long Island City here in Boston, and people would think Montauk. It couldn't be further from the truth. When you look at the connectivity, this is the first thing that really drew us to the area. We're going to talk about, and there are a lot of very successful projects, and we're going to talk about them today, and they're spread out throughout the city. And I think it goes to what we thought of a couple of years ago, that the term we use is unanchored, that there's going to be pockets of life science throughout the city, and there's going to be successful projects throughout the city. Unlike Boston, where everybody thinks Kendall Square, and it just kind of plopped down there. It happened over 30 years, and for a multitude of reasons. What people also don't realize is that Kendall Square, yes, is what everybody talks about, but it's half or less than half, frankly, of the lab space in Boston. So there's a lot of lab space outside of Kendall Square and multiple areas, and we're seeing more, areas like the Seaport and Somerville and Watertown are all growing and very successful. So we think there's going to be multiple nodes within the city, but Long Island City, from our mind, set up very, very well to be a very successful market for the long term. I talked a little bit about proximity to the public transportation, the fact that we can deliver employees, tenants to the building from all areas of New York and outside of New York, with Penn Station and Grand Central being very close. Obviously, the Long Island Railroad has a stop in Long Island City. That was a big factor. The amenities, everything going on from the workforce housing, all the amenities. It's obviously Long Island City's changed dramatically and is changing dramatically before our eyes. And we think those are all important ingredients to a very successful project. One of the big things was the availability of structures in Long Island City. I talked a little bit about speed to market. Long Island City obviously has a long history of manufacturing, and the buildings themselves are very robust and conducive to life science. So that was a part. And the ability to cluster, there's the fact that there's been a lot of redevelopment, but there's a long way to go still. So the idea of replicating, whether it's us and others that are doing it now in the vicinity, we think is an important factor here for the growth of Long Island City. And then finally, the economics are a factor as well. In Manhattan and other parts of New York, obviously there's a lot of competing uses, which is the case in Long Island City, but the economics are different in Long Island City. And we thought that was an important factor when weighing all this. So you put all these together, and we're very excited about the building we're building, the project, and the prospects for Long Island City. And then taking a step back, all of New York, we think it's a growing market. We know New York is a little bit jealous of Boston, which we take some pride in, but we see New York as a market that's developing quickly, and we're very excited to be part of this growth.
Well, thanks, Rob, for that great description. And we really appreciate the vote of confidence that you've had in New York to come from Boston and invest here on a speculative basis, which, is one of the first times that that's happened in New York City. So that's absolutely terrific. And also the fact that you're addressing, the requirement for step out space with many of the companies that we'll learn about next week coming out of the innovation pipeline here. And I'm curious if you can just tell us a little bit about the types of companies that you're seeing look at your space and facility and what their needs are. In particular, we've got a growing number of companies here. You mentioned that you're outfitted for biology and chemistry. A growing number of companies here that are working in the synthetic biology area, and they need different kinds of facilities. And I'm just wondering if you had seen any of that, what you might comment on what are tenants looking for?
Yeah, so I think, the tenants are looking for the same things, frankly, that they're looking for in Boston. It's, it's the neighborhood. It's, how can my employees get to the building? What are the what are the amenities both within the building and external to the building. So all those components that are outside of our building are very, very important. Internally to our building, what we're doing, and we've seen tenants kind of across the whole range, from heavy chemistry to more, informatics and kind of computational companies. From our perspective, we're thinking about developing a building of this nature. What we're doing is building the infrastructure for the far end of the spectrum. I'll say the heavy chemistry with lots of fume hoods and once through air and all the systems, because you can obviously go the other way easily. What we've tried to do, and we thought was very important, frankly, is putting all the infrastructure in the building day one, assuming it's all heavy chemistry that's going to put a lot of onus, I'll say, on the structure. We can obviously go the other way, and we've seen tenants, across the whole spectrum. So it's tough to say, we haven't seen one particular tenant type over and over again. And I think it speaks to the market and how healthy the market is, and the types of tenants in the market, that there's a little bit of everything, not dissimilar to what we see in Boston. I think that's one of the things we're excited about, is that it's not, we're not seeing the same type tenant over and over again. There's a lot of activity now. There's a lot of, we kind of can see the momentum coming. Obviously, there's been some deals in the market, but I think there's going to be, more and more, and it's going to happen pretty quickly and just gain momentum, hopefully over the next few months.
Great. And just one last question. When will your project come online?
So we'll be right on the cusp between the first and second quarter of next year. So we're under heavy construction right now. We were able to continue construction largely through the spring and summer. And we're close to enclosing the building. That'll be done just about the end of the year. And we're starting to work on the mechanicals and interior work now. So we're kind of getting to you can actually go to the building, see the building, touch the building, which is a big component for what we do. It partly goes to the speculative nature. It's really hard to build the suit, even in Boston. Tenants want to be able to walk to the building and touch it and see it and understand what it's going to physically be. And we're starting to see that now as we can actually, it's all coming together.
Terrific. Well, that'll be a bright spot in the middle of winter next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Something to look forward to. What are the challenges in putting companies in there if the pandemic hasn't eased?
We're all dealing with the same challenges. I mean, we're trying to figure out, a couple things. It's the physical tours of building. Obviously, that's gotten a little bit easier, but physically getting people to and through the building safely is first and foremost. Companies that aren't based in New York or don't have all their people in New York, obviously getting them to the building is a factor. And then we're thinking, like everybody, both, no matter what type of product, what enhancements do we need to make to the building, want to make to the building longer term. I'll put a plug in for Mitch and his firm. We're working with them on enhancing the HVAC. Luckily, and we say this in Boston too, luckily lab buildings, it's once through air. They're kind of inherently, I'm not going to say designed for a pandemic, but it's easier to retrofit a building, to get more air through the building. That's what we're already doing. But we're thinking about the lobby and communal spaces and, elevators and all that. What can we do to make the environment as safe as possible? Now, it's a little bit interesting for us because we're delivering the building first and second quarter. So we're trying to look around the corner and figure out what the world's going to look like then. I don't think any of us know. So we're taking steps to plan as if it's not going to change, but knock on wood, for many reasons, we hope things have changed. So we're weighing all those factors. But, just the physically getting all the workers, keeping everybody safe, keeping the job, clean and safe, I think is the first priority we have right now.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. And want to call on Nolan English right now, who is the Director of Community and U.S. Operations for SOSV with IndieBIO, and obviously one of the users in the city, and an initiative that was partially funded by the state. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. So Nolan, welcome. And we're so excited to have you in New York.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Great to be here today, and really excited to talk more about the IndieBIO New York program. First, a little bit of background on SOSV, the firm behind IndieBIO. We're a global venture capital firm that provides multi-stage investment to develop and scale big ideas for positive change. On average, we invest in about 150 new companies every year through one of our accelerator programs. So our first touch point with our portfolio companies is typically at a very early stage. They're newly formed entities. They've got 2 to 3 co-founders, and we're typically the first institutional capital into them. We have these 3 to 6 month intensive programs that not only provide startup capital, but specialized global staff, from engineers, scientists, and designers, 1,000+ experienced mentors that have deep market and technical expertise, and then of course, access to fully outfitted state-of-the-art wet lab and maker facilities. That's a really key component of our programs. So in 2014, SOSV founded the first life sciences accelerator in the world, IndieBIO in San Francisco. The program has been enormously successful, and since inception, invested in 218 companies that have gone on to raise over $1 billion in follow-on funding from external investors. As a result, IndieBIO has now become one of the world's most active life sciences investors. As Eric mentioned earlier today, last year SOSV participated in a competitive bid process and won a $25 million subsidy from Empire State Development to expand IndieBIO to New York and launch IndieBIO program here in New York City. We had seen a number of strong applicants from the New York area over the past few years actually apply and get accepted into IndieBIO and then relocate permanently to the Bay Area post-program. This was primarily due to lack of funding, lack of support, lack of resources back home. And we've actually surveyed all of those companies before expanding to New York, and all of them would have applied to a New York IndieBIO program. So that was very validating. With our expansion, we saw a well-timed opportunity to galvanize the life sciences ecosystem in New York, not only to hold on to the wealth of talent we know is already here, coming through great institutions in New York, but also to attract talent from other parts of the country and other parts of the world, as we have done in San Francisco. And that's important because historically, around 67% of IndieBIO portfolio companies stay in the Bay Area post-program. These are companies not only from California, but companies from other parts of the country and other countries from around the world. And as a result, these companies have come to occupy close to 500,000 square feet and employ over 1,000 people in the Bay Area. We expect to see the same trend here in New York. And our long-term goal is to transform New York into the premier angel and seed life sciences hub for the entire East Coast. So as an added incentive, we're currently raising a $50 million sidecar fund to invest in IndieBIO New York companies that stay in New York post-program. The Partnership Fund for New York City is anchoring the fund with $10 million in committed capital, and we expect to close that this year. So it's still early. We just launched the first New York cohort this year virtually in May. They're actually, they have their demo day next week, next Tuesday from 1 to 3 p.m. I'll put the registration link in the chat. We'd love to have you all attend. It should be a great event. If you're interested in meeting the founders and learning more about the companies, we'd love to have you. And we'll be kicking off the next cohort next year in a temporary space at Rockefeller University. We hope to do this in person. It's a huge value add to have the founders with us. And obviously, access to wet lab facilities is a major attraction for these early stage companies. And then on the real estate side, SOSV will be opening a flagship office in New York, probably in Q1 of 2022. Which will become the long-term home of IndieBIO New York. It'll be roughly 25,000 square feet of office and lab space, and also will become a critical hub for life sciences in New York City, featuring sessions and programming and events for the ecosystem. And then echoing, fellow panelists and Doug from earlier today, we're going to be graduating 150 companies, probably more than 150 companies, New York companies over the next 5.5 years. So available and flexible and affordable step out space for early stage companies that they can move to and expand in post-program is going to be immensely critical for the success of the program. As I mentioned, we've got about 25,000 square feet, or we'll have 25,000 square feet. And at some point they have to move out and they have to expand. The first thing they usually do after they raise seed or Series A is hire. So they expand quite quickly. And I'm just, it's very validating to see that there's so many emerging projects coming online that we'll be able to funnel companies into and ensure the success of the program and the portfolio.
Wow, it sounds like a real engine of growth here.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about the range of companies that participated in the New York cohort? I know Stephen is participating next week and can speak to that more. And then what is the pitch day next week that you were talking about? Can you describe that a little bit?
Yep. So demo day, typically every program ends with a capstone event. They call them demo days. It's an opportunity for the companies to pitch. They've been working on crafting their story, for the duration of the program, creating a pitch deck. Also, these are scientists, so sometimes they have a harder time communicating what they do to the general public. So they really work on crafting their story and communicating the value add of what they're working on. So this is an opportunity for them to pitch to investors, to media, to partners, to other major leaders in the ecosystem. Typically, these are in person. IndieBIO usually has about 1,000 attendees, so we've had to move these virtually. So Tuesday is IndieBIO New York, and Wednesday will be IndieBIO San Francisco. So you'll hear from the 9 companies in New York that have just gone through the program. They'll have a pitch, and then there'll be a Q&A session with each founder. And we've seen a range, typically with IndieBIO, you see synthetic biology, therapeutics, diagnostics. We also have a strong future food and agriculture portfolio with companies like Memphis Meats and Perfect Day that make food products without animals. One of my favorite IndieBIO New York companies, Halomine, had a critical response to COVID. Typically, when you're disinfecting surfaces with chlorinated products, it only protects the surface for about 15 minutes. They have a technology that extends the life of chlorine on a surface, providing continuous protection for weeks, for days and even weeks. So, that was really exciting to see. And I would say in general, a lot of IndieBIO companies pivoted during COVID to work on solutions that are critical to the pandemic.
So they never stopped.
Yeah, never stopped. We've seen the program continuing, and companies are still successful. And so it was great that we were able to pivot to a virtual model, but also see support and continue to fund companies working on critical solutions.
Great. And about your space requirement, I'm sure everyone's really interested in that. How are you approaching that? What are the challenges you're finding in terms of thinking about space in New York?
Well, it's great actually, because we started exploring options in 2018, and it's just great to see the change, about a year and a half later, 2 years later, in terms of options, in terms of landlords that want life science tenants that are understanding of basic needs. For us, I would say, space that can support a variety of different types of companies would be great. Having access to shared facilities in a space would also be a big value add. Since we can't support everything in-house. But we don't know exactly what the next group of companies will look like coming through the program, so we have to anticipate needs as possible. And then accessibility will be really key. We do want to become a hub for events and programming, but we'll be bringing in media and investors and mentors from other parts of the country, other parts of New York. So accessibility will be probably one of the top priorities for the space.
Great. Well, that's exciting. That's really exciting. And we have Stephen Chambers, who's running IndieBIO New York, to join us on our accelerator panel next week. And then Poe Bronson, who's going to close with our keynote address. So really welcome you and IndieBIO to New York, and very exciting to have you here. So next up is Matt Weir, the Senior Vice President in Commercial Asset Management for Taconic Investment Partners, to talk about Hudson Research Center and the new cluster that he's building on the West Side.
Thank you, Nancy. And by the way, thanks to your team for this great virtual background. I feel like I'm in a music video. I love it.
I tried it out and it wasn't working for me, but now that I see it with you, I think I'll try it again the next time.
So thanks again for having us. So Taconic is a vertically integrated developer, owner, operator that invests exclusively here in New York City. We currently have over 2.5 million square feet of commercial properties under development, repositioning, and various stages of planning. Historically, we have been leaders in emerging sectors here in the city, going back 23 years to our acquisition of 111 8th Avenue, which had two primary sectors. One was mission critical data centers, and two was tech office, where we leased the building and eventually sold the building to Google. We also are doing medical and clinical offices in New York, something we've done a long time, all various types of office development. And obviously, life sciences is one of our primary areas of focus now. And, if you look back, Doug, his presentation earlier today, it really, I think, highlights the momentum that we have all seen. And again, this is, I think, your third year doing this. As we go back 3-4 years, and now where we are, I think we've all come a long way in the projects that Alex and his team and Rob and his team and so on and so forth. Just absolute tremendous momentum. And our Hudson Research Center is, again, one of those that was early, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And the other really exciting part for us, we're getting ready to announce our second life science project, and it is going to be in this same cluster as you alluded to, Nancy. We think this will further cement the West Side as one of a number, as we were talking about here today and in the following days, one of a number of really exciting subclusters for this. So again, tremendous momentum overall, and one that we, it's good to be diversified in times like these, and we've seen, and I'm sure the other developers on the webinar will tell you, we've seen momentum pre-COVID in life science, and again, Doug's and the various speakers have shown that. And certainly it's continued. You might even say it's sort of had an even further push with COVID. And so we'll talk a little bit more about our activity and what we're seeing a little bit more. But to focus on the Hudson Research Center at West 54th Street, this is a project that we're doing with our partner Silverstein. And if you want to just flip to the next slide, I'll touch on two of our existing tenants that I think much of the network here and in the city are well aware of. But the New York Stem Cell Foundation built their executive headquarters and proprietary stem cell lab. They opened back in 2017. And again, back to Doug's timeline, this was really our first foray into the sector. One of many transactions that are pending and nearing completion. We were excited to announce we actually expanded the New York Stem Cell Foundation earlier this year. They originally were, call it 1 1/3 full floors at the building. They now occupy 2 full floors. And we think this is a great data point, if you will, for the sector at large, is that, notwithstanding COVID, and in fact, right in the midst of COVID, you had one of our great foundations here in the city expanding and further showing their commitment to New York, but also we're excited that they're expanding their programming in the building. If you just want to jump to the next slide, an initiative that we started at the end of 2018 into early 2019 was our program of constructing graduation or step out spaces. So plug and play, pre-built labs. This is a need, an absolute need that we see. And again, we've been at this in the city now a while, going back 3 or 4 years. And we've been able to approach this very methodically. You might even say we have a head start mentally versus some of the other landlords that are coming from the same background that we had, which was, office and other traditional developments here in New York City. But this was a need that we saw. We began pre-building space for early stage companies, and we were thrilled to have Hybercell come into the building. Again, they moved in spring of last year. You can see the product that we were able to build and deliver for them. And they're really, in our minds, the perfect illustration of what the New York ecosystem could be, the types of tenants that you'll see. Doug mentioned, this is great venture capital partners, EDC and the Partnership for New York. You had all of these different funding sources, and we think a great execution, and they're doing really well. We're looking to build space, and as Rob mentioned, it's flexible in its systems. It's able to accommodate a variety of different tenants. Nancy, you've touched on a couple of them today. There is such a broad set of verticals under the life science umbrella, and we're actually amazed at some of the technologies that these folks are working on. But for us, and again, we're coming from the traditional landlord model. We've done office, we've created really exciting spaces for companies like Google and Samsung and Apple and all of these things. Well, how we're approaching our properties is with our traditional platform and model, which is to create great spaces, great environments, and really understand the design and engineering of it. And in that, we're looking to create spaces that are flexible to be able to accommodate the variety of use types and verticals within that umbrella that you're going to see. And so to answer a question that you had posed earlier, Nancy, a synthetic biology company working on X, they're going to have very specific equipment. But if you sort of trace that equipment, just to be very simple and sort of illustrative, if you trace that equipment up to the connection point, it really boils down to a few things, which is exhaust, air, electric, emergency power, et cetera. And in that's where the flexibility of infrastructure, as Rob was mentioning earlier, and as Mitch and his team can certainly opine on, that to us is the key. It's creating spaces that no matter the particular use, they can come in, plug and play, ready to go. And that's really what our program is. So as we go forward, our next phase of graduation space development is our 7th floor. It's 33,000 square feet. We've already commenced the design of that. We will begin construction by the end of the year. We will deliver that first or that next phase in July of 2021. It'll be roughly 2 suites, 18 to 20,000 square feet and 10 to 12,000 square feet roughly. And then after that, we have 2 additional full floors. So 97,000 feet in total, the first third of that in July. And we announced those plans roughly 6 or 8 weeks ago. And in the last 2 weeks, we have had more leasing traction than we've seen at any point since we began. And again, in the face of COVID, we find this super encouraging. And I know that all of the speakers today have alluded to the momentum that's built up. And I would sort of take that a step further and say, from our perspective, again, having done stem cell in 2017, having been marketing this space to life science companies, having then pushed forward into creating fully spec, fully pre-built spaces. To me, this feels like the launching point right now. We're at the launch point right now to take New York's life science ecosystem and run with it. It took quite a bit of time. I think all of the elements are falling into place. Capital is certainly one of them. So you look at groups like Nolan was discussing, so crucial. In the face of COVID, 2020 is going to be the record year for capital raise across all the different sectors here. That leads to job growth, which leads to commercial real estate demand. And again, Taconic is a New York City exclusive investor. Our underlying thesis, no matter the sector we invest in, is that talent wants to be in New York City. And even in the face of COVID, we still believe that. We're very bullish on that long term. And so if talent wants to be in New York City, and we now put all the elements in place, vis-a-vis wet lab space, vis-a-vis venture capital, et cetera, if you look at the macro trends and you look at global financing and you look at NIH financing, and I think by and large, people expect government funding to increase to avoid future pandemics and to get out ahead of certain things. But if you look at all the macro forces, again, our underlying thesis is that New York should be able to capture its disproportionate share of any sector. We've believed that a long time. We've seen that play out. We believe that's going to happen in life science. And again, we believe right now is the sort of launching point. As I alluded to, our activity in the last few weeks has been tremendous, certainly relative to everything else going on in the market. And, we see certain trends that were alluded to earlier today. A number of those folks have been and are coming out of our incubators. So an earlier panel talked about the importance of those facilities. We're thrilled at how quickly that's actually happening. We always know that that's a feeder into graduation space, which is what we're focused on. But to see it already and accelerating, Velostra was one recent example. We're thrilled. So we couldn't be more bullish on this sector. We couldn't be more bullish on New York City. And I just wish we could build this space faster because we think the demand is there. But in either case, July 1st, we have our next tranche of space. And then we believe we'll deliver the balance of that, say, by the end of next year.
Wow. Well, that couldn't be a stronger endorsement for the New York marketplace. So thank you very much, Matt. It's interesting. I think that your perspective was so great because it was kind of very broad and covered the marketplace. But two things I think that you, in particular, that you bring in terms of your insight. One is you are a traditional developer. You're focused on New York. This is what Mitch and I started this organization to do, is to educate others like you about the opportunity that was available. And you participated in our very first symposium as one of the projects that was underway at the moment, and really the only one, the Hudson Research Center. And at that time, the New York Stem Cell, you had just finished that and were looking to start to invest in additional space. I'm wondering if you can talk about that evolution in your thought process and the lessons you learned, putting the New York Stem Cell Foundation in that space to allow you to move forward. We looked at that for the New York Genome Center early on. The space was great, but it was tough. And so maybe you want to comment on your experience a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the evolution can probably, be viewed in a couple of different lenses. One is, in a market like Boston, and I know a question was raised again on an earlier panel about how equity investors and lenders, what their appetite is for this sector. If you look at a market like Boston, it's very straightforward. You've got data and comparables all across the board. You've got availability rates at 0. You've got enough of an institutional data set that proves the thesis. One of the issues with New York, and frankly, any market that's forming or starting, it's the chicken and the egg. One of the challenges has simply been lack of data, lack of comps. If we say to our partners, we think we should pre-build this, they go, great, how much does it cost? Who are all the tenants out there? And there's a bit of a leap of faith that had to happen early on. And I think one of the biggest evolutions has been in first deciding that this was a sector that we wanted to foster, marketing your space as such, which, look, there's strategies that you want to go down the middle of the fairway. There's others that say we need to really identify to a particular user base. And once you do that, you then see the tenants come along. You have to get into that to start to evaluate and identify your own data set. So that's a challenge when you're an early mover. And we've now, again, been at this a number of years and been able to see that and develop our own data set from the inside. And that's been huge. That helped us take the leap from doing a more traditional lease structure with New York Stem Cell to now saying we're going to spec build. And we believe that the users are out there. And again, that's a belief in the macro level demand drivers here in New York, the number of institutions, again, the prevalence of the venture capital that's come here, et cetera, et cetera. So on the market side, I think that's been an evolution. And like you said, on the physical space side, this is another area where it's evolved. And it started with working hand in hand with Stem Cell to get their facility built in a tenanted building, which is a challenge. We would prefer to start with an empty building to run all of that infrastructure. but we certainly learned a lot about the infrastructure to serve those tenants and how we can adapt our building for that. And then, of course, working with firms like Mitch's team at JB&B, ER+A, Perkins, and Will, and again, this has been several years of our investment into that process. We've learned how to really look at space, how to create that flexible environment to be able to capture the demand across the various verticals under life science. And that too has been an evolution. And on that, our telecom experience helped us quite a bit in terms of understanding mission critical systems, obviously different, but the mindset and again, our experience in some of the other sectors that had robust infrastructure. So that evolution that you allude to, I think, happened in those two primary, through those two lenses.
Interesting. So the other area that I think your insight would be particularly helpful, you've done a lot of work with Google, and the 4 tech companies have placed a real stake in New York City over the last year, especially Google, building a brand new 1 million square foot campus in Hudson Square. What are your thoughts on connecting, making the connections between the tech sector and life sciences in New York, and how those two might actually amplify the future?
Yeah, I think this, again, comes back to our underlying thesis. We believe New York is a center for talent, tech talent, finance talent, media advertising, life science, research, fashion, across the board. And with those types of centers, you now have opportunities to cross-pollinate and connect the dots, so to speak, between all of those sectors. It's one of many, aspects of New York City that we think helps foster the life science industry in particular. We've already talked today so much about the great institutions that are here, the patient data or the patient sets that are here for clinical and work. The workforce, it's the largest workforce, the New York MSA, all of those. I think the tech and other sort of centers that you can connect the dots to and cross collaborate present a really interesting opportunity. Again, the New York life science industry is still early stage. I think what you need to have happen is all of these projects that all these other great investors and landlords are doing. We need to start getting more traction, creating more of the footprint. I think that'll then attract more capital, larger users, smaller users. And I think once you continue and build that momentum, then you're able to see at that point those connections into, the tech. And by the way, you've seen it already. There's been, Flatiron Health and other digital health companies certainly setting up in New York, and you're seeing that. I ultimately believe that'll be yet another opportunity for New York to leverage the companies that are here and also the talent that is here. I think that's one thing that can't be emphasized enough, which is so much of the work that folks are doing, and you alluded to it earlier, Nancy, in terms of big data and digital health. A lot of that might be the same type of talent that Google is attracting here in New York and the folks that are already here. So when companies are making a decision as to where to locate, which cities, that will also be a factor. And we think that only bodes well for continued growth. But yeah, I think over the next several years, as this sector continues to gain momentum, we're excited at the prospects for, whether it's Google or Facebook or others, but connecting the life science ecosystem to those other ecosystems that are, unquestionably very, very strong relative to other markets in the country.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that insight. And next year, if you have any great announcements to make, we hope you make them at this meeting. Add some excitement. Our next two guests are basically developers who are doing slightly different projects. They are both working with a cluster of up to 1 million square feet in both places that could be utilized for life science and tech use. And this is really creating a campus environment, both of them, very close to academic centers. All of the rest of the projects that we've talked about are building their own clusters in different areas of the city, but these are really attached to academic centers or very close to them anyway. Scott Metzner is a principal of Janus Property Company, and is building the Manhattanville Factory District, which will be up to 1.1 million square feet, but starting with the Taystee building, right?
Scott, you're muted.
You're muted, Scott.
You have to unmute.
No, you had it. Now you're muted again. Perfect.
Good.
That might have been you, Nancy, but maybe it was me. I apologize. So we're the lead developer on the Manhattanville Factory District, which has been growing and is really now up to about 1.5 million square feet, over about 4 acres. In addition to what we're doing, there's a new hotel and luxury residential rental going up next to us. That's up to about the 3rd floor. So as you mentioned, we are based in the Columbia University and just a couple blocks from City College and the Structural Biology Center. We're near all the hospitals on the west side, and we're at the ABCD and number 1 trains, the West Side Highway, the Hudson bike path, near the Metro North Station, very close to the Port Authority, uptown. There's a pretty good map of it. We're on 125th Street, which is the major commercial district and arts and culture district uptown. And so we've been developing this campus and this location really for about 20 years. And I was involved when the first conversations, like you were, Nancy, of where some of the civic leaders were talking about how do we bring life science, the life science industry to New York City. And it has been a long time. And I agree with Matt. You know, it feels like the beginning of a launching point. I think it's interesting to note that basically all of us are building spec buildings. You know, so I think that all of us, and including you, Nancy, are at the forefront of making New York City a leader in this industry. And I do agree with what a lot of people are saying. There certainly will be plenty of clusters. We think we have, you know, being on the island of Manhattan, being adjacent to Columbia, and with the mass transit and the highways, et cetera, you know, we think we have a great project. We have 4 buildings that are basically complete. The 3rd completed recently. The 4th is at the final stages of tiling bathrooms and building out the lobby and building the landscaping. And maybe we can go to the next slide. I think shows really this neighborhood campus feel that is an abstraction, but we have incorporated a large amount of publicly accessible outdoor space that accesses directly to our campus from 125th Street, through the campus and the buildings, back through 126th, 7th, through our campus on the north side of 127th up to 128th Street, which is basically the beginning of Convent Avenue and where City College begins. We have been devoted to the life science field for quite some time. We have Renal Research Institute and might have been one of our first medical type uses in a 25,000 square foot dialysis center, which is basically like a hospital. We have Samsia's Harlem Biospace, which I think was the first incubator. We were proud that we attracted Quintus Therapeutics as they did their Series A and came up from Alexandria, and Velastra Therapeutics as they did their seed capital deal and came up from JLabs. We have about 400,000 square feet right now, where the base building incorporates all of the components related to life science, so we can plug and play. For the lab that Velastra moved into, that's a turnkey lab that we did, right down to similar to what some of the other folks talked about, right down to lab benches and office furniture and whiteboards. So we're very excited about this. I think it's an interesting field. I think it is. We're very lucky that it's still an area where there is a lot of capital, which is allowing all of us to do things which in the general real estate market are a little bit tougher, especially now. We're very proud to have a very powerful and astute partner in JP Morgan Asset Management, who's got experience not only in New York as major owner, but around the country. We're excited to be a part of this growing field.
Well, we're excited to have you, and I've been up to your development, and it is coming along really quite nicely. So congratulations on that. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about the origins of this development and how the city and state came together to really help make it happen.
Sure. And we can also, I know you gave me a lead in on the Taystee Lab building, which we have a couple of renderings or photographs maybe in the next several pages, which is the project. That's the neighborhood. That's basically, most of those buildings are ours. Taystee is on the right side there. That's the hero shot of the Taystee building with one of the landscaped areas down to the right. There's the landscaped area looking south to 125th Street. And that's inside one of the landscaped areas. That's the Taystee building in front of us, a malt house across the street, which is completed. That may be it. I don't know if there are any others. Oh, that's the lobby of the Taystee building, which someone else was talking about. We also understand the necessity of gathering areas and have incorporated those both on individual floors and in some of the ground floor areas. We've been involved with both the local community, elected officials, community leaders, various agencies, various mayors over the last 20 years, certainly Governor Cuomo and ESD. And we've found that, this is an area that everyone is excited about. And so we found a terrific cooperation from, again, everyone from the local community, Columbia University, City College. We've been pleased that our tenants and we have been the beneficiaries of grants from both EDC and the New York City Economic Development Corporation and New York State Empire State Development. And so it's one of those rare moments, I think, where the government, where academia and the private sector are coming together to really try to push this. And as again, all the other participants have said, I mean, New York City knows how to do this. And I can remember early conversations with some of the folks from Boston. We're pretty quick to the take here in New York. And so I think it's sort of starting from a standing start, but certainly, Taconic and New York Stem Cell were early. I think we were very early. It's amazing to watch the city sort of throw its arms around this and really row in the same direction to I have no doubt that New York is going to become a leader in this industry.
Yeah, so that's great. And the other question I thought was important is you're in the middle of a rapidly changing neighborhood in Harlem. And, the idea of the surrounding neighborhoods being very important in terms of places for people to live, people to walk, to cultural, organizations or institutions, and be able to go out to eat very close to where they're working. You got a pretty vibrant neighborhood there. Could you just talk a little bit about what you're doing to kind of build that vibe up there?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the advantages of our neighborhood, it's a true 24/7 neighborhood. We're at the intersection not only of all the activity of Columbia University, all the activity of what we're creating there. And our retail is largely focused on amenity-driven retail, experiential retail. But we also have the Harlem Stage, we have the Apollo Theater, we have the Studio Museum. We have this new Renaissance Hotel that's going up not far from us. There's on both sides of us, there are a little dampened down because of COVID, but very active restaurant, bar, event activities going on all the time. Obviously, a huge amount of young people living in the area. You can still buy a luxury condo within 2-3 block radius, 4-block radius of our properties for well less than $1,000 a foot. We think it's a very vibrant community and gives the, as I say, this 24/7 activity that young people, want to be in, that people, when they, again, with our public spaces that we're building, where you could sit outside and have lunch outside, hold a meeting outside, hold a corporate event outside. And we have not only these publicly accessible outdoor spaces, I haven't counted them, but we must have 11, 12 spaces that have direct access to private outdoor space at different terrace levels and roof levels. And so that's the sort of, one of the advantages we think we have is really that level of accessibility and that level of excitement. And we also see some of the employment base coming from New Jersey, either driving or taking buses or trains. And those commuters have a very easy shot in from the far west side where we are.
Yeah, and you'll be contributing to that open space, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, this is just a wonderful description of, a very large mixed-use development. Many of your buildings require historic preservation, right? And so what was it like to do adaptive reuse for life sciences in the context of having historic buildings on your site?
So our buildings ultimately did not require historic preservation, but we sort of promised the neighborhood that we would do that. And we promised the neighborhood because we wanted to do it. And so a big part of what makes our neighborhood, I think, feel authentic and feel like it's part of New York City is that these buildings, we've inserted these very modern vertical additions and new constructions to these old masonry buildings. And so incorporating, various setbacks at, street wall and above. And so when you walk down the street, notwithstanding that there's, on this one block, you look to your left and your right and you've got 1.5 million square feet of new space, new over the last 15 and next 5 years, say. And it feels really comfortable. And it feels like a place you want to stop and have a cup of coffee. We've got a new craft coffee roaster, Plowshares Coffee. It feels like a place where you'd love to sit outside. It feels like a place that will be welcoming if you live on the block or if you are visiting or if you work here. And so the physical challenges, I think, for any of us on this call who are in the construction or real estate business, the physical challenges of adding new to old and costs are immense. It was a difficult decision. In some cases at Taystee, where we intended to do the same thing, the city came in and put an emergency demolition order, an emergency vacate order on the original building standing there. And that's why that building is 100% new. But at Mink and at Malt and Suites building, these were immensely complex construction projects. But as I think Rob might have mentioned, similar to these, other manufacturing buildings, they come with the bones of, multi-hundreds of square foot loading capacity. They come with very high ceilings, so, good access with drive-in loading, et cetera, et cetera. So We've tried to make the best of both worlds. In some of our buildings, if you go into the 3rd floor of the existing space, close your eyes and ride up the elevator and go into the 11th floor of a curtain wall space, you feel transported. You can't believe it's in the same building. We found there are tenants, some tenants who like that charming old, brick vaulted ceilings, and some tenants who like a glass curtain wall.
Great. Well, I know it's been a challenge and a long time coming, and it's just about to come to fruition. So congratulations on that. Our next developer, Guy Liebler, who's the president of SimoneHealthcare Development, is working on a new development in the Bronx, which is probably the largest life science development in the city right now, and is flying really under the radar, right next to the Einstein Medical Center. So Guy, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, and my pleasure to be on such a very unique and interesting panel. So I am a member of the Simone Development Companies and lead our Simone Healthcare Development Group, which has taken the next step along with many other developers into life sciences. We're watching healthcare and life sciences quickly merge together. We have been in the healthcare industry for more than 20 years, starting with the Hutchinson Metro Center original development in 2001, which today is a 4-building, 1.4 million square foot complex, which includes the 285,000 square foot ambulatory hospital operated by Montefiore Health System, a very important component of their array of hospitals throughout the metropolitan area, Bronx and Westchester and north of Westchester as well. As many of you know, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine is a part of Montefiore and is one of the major medical schools in the city of New York. We have been working with New York State ESD since they issued the request for proposals in November of 2013, and we were fortunate to win that RFP in 2014, and have been working with ESD and the state over the last 6 years as we've gone through a very complicated EIS and a variety of other requirements in order to redevelop the property. The property is 33 acres. It became surplus from the Office of Mental Health as they built all new facilities for their patients and clients on the southern portion of the property. So we have been at the northern portion of the property for a number of years, having bought that property piece by piece from the state of New York and 2 parcels independently of the state. And now we will have the additional 33 acres, making our total campus 74 acres. Our new campus includes 7 buildings of 1.8 million square feet, of which the first phase will be 4 buildings of 1 million square feet. We are planning on repurposing 2 of the original buildings. One building is about 300,000 square feet. The second is 500,000 square feet, and we will build a 3rd building of 150,000 square feet and a residential building of 100 apartment buildings, apartment units. The residential component will be for those that are working at the campus, students, scientists, researchers, office workers. We thought that was an important part of our ecosystem. And the second phase will be 3 other buildings, one of which will be an additional 150 apartment units. We do believe, as others on the panel, that New York City is poised to become a member of the Life Sciences Club, along with San Francisco and Kendall Square and Cambridge. And it is wonderful to see so many parts of the city of New York, all the boroughs participating in this effort. It is not any one area that will win the game, but all of us working together will create this life science hub. And we are very fortunate to have the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. We think that that is our incubator. They have a vivarium and they have wet and dry bench areas, and they are poised in there working with New York City EDC in pursuing a grant, a matching grant for the further development of wet and dry space for incubator. We think that New York has many of the components. We certainly have smart people and scientists and researchers. What we've learned is that a lot of the business talent has left the city over the years, and that has caused some of the companies that have incubated to move up to Boston. We're encouraged in some of the conferences that we've gone to in the last 2 years to see that some of the men and women who are looking to change their careers out of Pfizer or Merck or Johnson & Johnson are becoming those next generation of startup leadership that will work with the young scientists and creators to put structure and form to this next generation of business. I think we've all learned how important science is over the last 9 months, and are all committing to our buildings for science. Maybe I'll take you through the slides. If we can have the next slide, please. I'll do them quickly and talk about some of the important components of what we're doing. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So this is one back. I'm sorry, we were a little bit off. This is our site plan. To the left, at the bottom, is a building that we are positioning for life sciences. It is over 500,000 square feet with a 100,000 square foot floor plate. We will fully redevelop this building from all new infrastructure and services. And yes, as Scott said, taking these old buildings into new buildings is complicated and expensive. Sometimes it is always easier to start new, but speed to market for us is important as well. The next building to the right is a building we will also reposition. We are looking at that building as a hotel. Up top in the back, we operate already in one of our existing buildings, a 125 room Marriott Residence Inn, which has been a very successful hotel in the Marriott chain. It's one of the few flag hotels in the whole area, certainly the only in our region of the Bronx, and has been very successful. And we have a franchise with another hotel operator that will be in this building. To the right on the campus are 3 new office buildings. The 2 on the far right are in the next phase. And the 2 buildings that look a little bit more residential in the back are the apartment buildings. The one on the left will be in phase 1, having 100 apartments. You can see in the back, and as we get a little further into the slides, that is the location. It says MTA. If you can see it, if your eyesight's really good, that is the location of one of the 4 Metro North stations that are coming to the Bronx through the governor's efforts. This station is scheduled for 2023. Because of COVID and capital budget, we're hearing rumor it might be 2024, but I still have my fingers crossed for 2023. This will provide transportation by the MTA between New York Penn Station and up to Stamford, Connecticut, bringing all kinds of office workers and scientists and researchers to and from this area of the Bronx and the other 3 stations as well. So we are very excited and very encouraged by this station. As you can see on the site plan, there are 2 baseball fields that are already on the property. We will build new baseball fields and keep them as the continuation of the importance of the Little League in our section of the Bronx. We are also providing for walking trails and breakout areas for collaboration and study. We will do them inside of the buildings and also at the outside portion of the campus. Next slide, please. Just an idea of where we are. We are in the Northeast Bronx. We're only a few miles south of the Westchester County line, and a hop, skip, and a jump across the Whitestone Bridge to New York's LaGuardia and JFK Airport, and about a half-hour ride into Manhattan not so bad. I wouldn't recommend it at 9 in the morning or 5 in the afternoon, but that's why we're all going to take the train into the city in a few years. Next slide, please. 3 of the existing buildings that make up the current Hutchinson Metro Center, home to both healthcare as well as city, state, and federal agencies. Next slide. On the left is the Montefiore Ambulatory Hospital. In the middle is the Residence Inn Hotel, which sits on top of a 300,000 square foot office building, which is healthcare and other business offices. And on the right is a rendering of the new Mta Railroad Station. Next slide, please. The site plan, you saw it in rendering, so just quickly on the site plan, you can see it again. It shows some of our existing properties up at the top left, our Metro Center atrium, which is where the railroad station is, and then all of the other buildings that you can see across the array, which is the full 1.8 million square feet of new office buildings, including the life science building, which you see slightly shaded in purple at the bottom left. Next slide. A view of the campus that's looking east, the hotel on the right, the new residential buildings on the left, and then looking towards the campus with the train right in front of you. Next slide. And the 2 buildings that we will repurpose as part of the initial phase of the project, the life science building to the left, and the hotel and commercial office building on the right with our landscape campus. We are expecting the construction of these 2 buildings to commence in the 3rd quarter of next year. We will be closing with the SD probably in July, August, or September, and then we'll start construction shortly thereafter. Next slide. And that's the a close-up shot of the life science building. Next slide. And a view of our life science space. Looks a little bit like what we saw from Matt. We're all looking to do the best that we possibly can for the life science tenant that we all want to have and help them grow and bring more life and activity. The nice thing about these campuses, both life sciences and healthcare, is they are almost full-time 24/7 institutions, and they bring life and vibrancy to any community where they are going to be located. So we just think that is very important to the community, and a lot of people. We want to make sure that as many people in the community can take advantage of these campuses, and of course, so whether it's by being a good neighbor or even employment. Next slide. A cutaway section showing how we'll develop the building. And that is our presentation. And just to close, as others have said, we think that the economics of the Northeast Bronx, the scale of our buildings and floor plates that we can offer, and certainly transportation will make us very competitive. And I don't think we'll be any more competitive than any of the others on the panel. We want to be a good partner, and we think that all of the regions of the city of New York are going to prosper with life sciences as part of our portfolio. Thank you very much.
That's terrific, Guy. Thank you. And we're running out of time. I mean, all these projects are just so great to talk about that we've used up all our time. And I was hoping we'd get all of you in a conversation with each other. But one question I had for you, Guy, is, you know, your development reminds me a little bit of the Alowife Station development in Cambridge, which, you know, was a little bit out from the East Cambridge, West Cambridge, you know, cluster that developed first, but ended up being a connection point between those, you know, more central Kendall Square and the suburbs of Lexington, Waltham, and you are there right on the way to Westchester, which is a very strong developing suburban life science, driven by Regeneron and its growth, obviously. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, Nancy, your point's very well taken. I grew up in Westchester County, and I watched IBM move from Manhattan to Westchester in the 60s. And what they did over the years for Westchester in bringing in technology was just a phenomenal opportunity for the growth of Westchester County as a bedroom community, and where everybody who lived in Westchester did not have to get on the train or drive to New York. Regeneron is the IBM of our generation. And other technology and life sciences companies are continuing to grow because of Regeneron. And I think we're certainly seeing that with Google and Facebook and others, Amazon in Manhattan. And we're excited to be in the middle. We think that there will be migration from the north, and there'll be migration from the south. And we think that our economics and scale of development and of course the new transportation linking all of us from the north and the south will put us in a very competitive place. So we are excited to be where we are, and of course to have the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and their important contribution to science and their relationships with the NIH give us a lot of positive energy to move this project forward.
So just as we close, is there anything you would like to ask each other, all of the leading developers leading the city towards life science future?
I'd like to invite everybody to lunch when we're all allowed to do that, and sit and talk and share stories and get to know one another better, and talk about all the ways that we perhaps could support all of our efforts. I think I'm very encouraged by what we've shared with one another, and look forward, Nancy, perhaps with your assistance, and Mitch too, keeping us all together.
We'd love to do that.
Our pleasure, believe me.
Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today.